Happy holidays. Happy New Year, everyone. Today, we're taking a look back at some of the most compelling Chad and Lori Daybell segments of 2023 here on the Hidden Killers podcast.
This is an examination of the hidden human condition.
This is the Hidden Killers podcast
with Tony Brueski.
We are joined today by psychologist Dr. John Delatorre. Excited to get your insight on all of the developments that we're dealing with in the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell. I should note that we recorded this conversation at a specific timestamp because there's going to be a lot of moving parts as these days continue to roll forward. The recording of this happened right before we got into closing arguments. So everything is being spoken on from that perspective. With that being said, first question I have for John in this conversation is, have you been at all surprised by the fact that the defense really did not do much defending when it came to be their turn? They defended against Cross, but at the end they said, we don't think you guys put up an adequate prosecution of this, so we're resting as well.
I do, because while I think that they may have, there's definitely an argument to be made that Lori wasn't the one that actually had her hands on and actually committed the murders directly. Well, I think there's an argument to be made there. I think she's more than likely, at the very minimum, going to be found guilty of conspiracy. So I think the defense kind of missed an opportunity to maybe pin a little bit more on Alex a little bit, just because he's not around to protect himself. So I am surprised that there wasn't anything really. I'm not surprised she didn't take the stand, but I am surprised that there wasn't more from the defense.
I wasn't expecting her to take the stand. I think she'd be completely ripped apart, as I'm sure you do too, if they were to make that move. But to not do anything at all, are we risking at this point, with the fact that nothing was brought up, inadequate counsel? I mean, I think it is an adequate counsel. I think it's just a case that's nearly impossible to defend. But I mean, it could be brought up on appeals, I would suppose, or have they demonstrated that they've done really everything they can for this woman?
Yeah, I think that they've done everything they can. Now, there's always going to be an appeal made for ineffective assistance of counsel, but that doesn't mean that the court's actually going to hear that ground on appeal. So anyone that thinks that whatever verdict is rendered is going to be undone on appeal, I think they're kind of missing the point of what an appellate court actually does. I don't think that's going to happen. I think whatever verdict happens, whatever verdict the jury decides, is pretty much going to stick.
Yeah, I would agree there. I want to get your insight into what we've been learning about. It kind of started out as a joke when it was released more than a year ago. The love letters, the love texts, technically, between Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow, playing the characters of John and Elana and some other names that they created in there, of this love affair that they're having. It turns out a lot of those storylines very much actually went along with reality. They coincided with it in many ways, shapes, and forms. And there's even more to these stories that we don't have the full text of, but they were talking about them in court the last couple of days, some of the excerpts being read. What is your take on this, where there's almost this dual storyline that Chad had been writing to her, seemingly far beyond just those initial texts, that go along with the story of what they're doing, but with different names and slightly different characters, but all very much the same sort of thing?
I think, I think some people might think this was some kind of coded messaging that they gave to each other, right? That they can just easily, say, well, whatever we talk about in here is just simply a fantasy, right? It's not real. I'm not really John. You're not really Elana. We're not really those things. But I do think that I can see an argument to be made about it being coded messages between the two of them. I think it's just more that they were just so weird with each other, that they did just weird things, and that they were interested in weird things and tried to fulfill all of their weirdness as much as they could. I don't know. It was pretty graphic, some of the stuff that they had been discussing, but I mean, that's the relationship that they were in, and none of us would be making any statements if the children and Chad's first wife hadn't been found dead.
That's true. I was trying to wrap my mind around some of that yesterday when I was hearing some of the testimony, because yes, it can be almost looked at as coded message, but I don't know that it was. Was it a way though that Chad was trying to control the narrative, considering he's the one who was writing all these things to her? She was very reactionary in the role when they were sent, from what we've seen. I mean, is this part of the? I mean, I would almost think that could have been used somewhat in an argument of a defense that, look, he's been writing her these things. There was kind of a cultish atmosphere, kind of mind control going on. Look at these letters as he was writing them, and then look how things kind of came true. Was there an element of that, do you think, to these, or is it them just being weird?
No, I think there's a little bit of an element to it, because we have to remember Chad was a writer.
Yeah.
Right. He wrote novels and stuff, like he wrote books. So I'm not surprised that a writer would use the skills that they had, and they can fashion. Right. A writer's job is to take what's happening in reality and fashion some kind of, fiction associated with it. So it's certainly possible that he's taking all of these ideas of what he wants, or he's seeing everything that's happening around him, and he fashions a narrative that he knows will control Lori. And Lori, wanting to have that kind of attention, simply falls in line with it and just, moves it further the way that she knows how.
I mean, it goes into the world of, I think, cultish type control. Have there been examples of this in the past where people use? I mean, obviously, there's like the Bible and things of that nature in modern religion, but I guess more so the breakoffs, the kind of one-offs where we're going to create this sort of thing on a smaller scale. I guess, of course, I can. As I ask this question, are there other examples? The Book of Mormon, the Catechism. There's all sorts of, Martin Luther. There's all sorts of modern, or not sort of modern, but, more mainstream breakoffs. Have you seen it used on a cult level, on smaller levels like this?
I mean, if we want to break away from religion, we talk about, Goebbels and the Nazi regime creating propaganda. Sure. Propaganda is everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the things when it comes to individuals who want to manipulate and coerce, they have to find a persuasive method, right? A messaging system that they know will get the people that they want, and using the central route to persuasion, which is things like writing and things like messaging, to get it out there in order to fulfill the gap in the person that they're trying to manipulate. Now, sometimes it's written down, sometimes it's an oral history, sometimes it really just kind of depends. And individuals who are good at this, or who are good at manipulating people, don't just do it one way. They do it all different kinds of ways, right? They find that thing, and sometimes it helps to have it written down, because then the person can take it with them and have it with them as if it's a leash that the cult leader can use to have a reign on the person that they are trying to coerce.
It's more powerful, I would say, than just someone speaking and them having a conversation. And here's what I want you to do, or here's the latest on the story of John and Elana. It truly does create something that can be looked back and reviewed and ruminated on. It's a powerful thing, it seems, that he knew that he had. Maybe he wasn't as powerful at vocalizing these things and controlling people that way, but he certainly seemed to have something going on with writing, albeit he was a horrible writer.
Yeah, and but being a horrible writer doesn't necessarily mean that, But the other thing is that that's probably where Lori came in, because Lori is attractive and she's probably outgoing and extroverted, and she can, draw people to her, right? And so in that drawing of people to her, there he is standing behind her with all of this narrative that, people are now listening to because they're so enamored with Lori.
It is shocking. What's your thoughts on, as we learn more in the last handful of days through testimony, of some of the other characters in the lives of Lori and Chad, specifically Zulema, who was married to Alex? We're looking at call logs and such of when certain people died, and the amount of communication seemingly going on between the survivors of this. Now, of course, it could be, oh my gosh, so-and-so died. We're going to have a lot of conversations about this. I'm starting to wonder or speculate, are some of these other individuals that we've seen on the stand that were close to them at one point in time that have now disowned them, you think there's more that some of them may have been involved or at least had knowledge of the extreme behaviors, specifically the murders that were taking place around them?
I think number one, there was probably a gut feeling within them that they knew something else was happening. I think some of them probably knew more than they let on. I think some of them suspected more than they probably let on. But I do think there comes a point when there's an internal struggle between what I know to be right versus what I think Lori and Chad are actually doing. And that's where you start seeing the breakoffs, right? That's where you start seeing some of these challenges. That's where you start seeing maybe diminished communication. Or if Lori and Chad need these individuals to perform some kind of action, they have to keep them there. So that's when you overwhelm them with communication, right? Mm-hmm. You feel them breaking away, then you got to, snag them back. But I think there was always something underneath, something that they could always feel wasn't quite right with Lori and Chad. And they really struggle with this the whole time.
Was that part of the allure of Lori and Chad, the fact that there's kind of this religious undertone about them? I mean, propaganda, as you described it earlier, actually describes it better than religion, because that's what Chad was doing, was doling out propaganda that he created. But is there something about their mystery, their strange behaviors to others, that I think even anybody who also exhibits strange behaviors would be able to look at and say, this is bizarre? Was it that allure, that mystery, that maybe they do know something we don't know, that helped keep some of these people with them for such a long period of time as they carried out their bad acts?
Yeah, it can be, especially if you're someone that needs something like that, or you want something like that, or you want to feel connected to something larger than you, or you're interested in a larger philosophical mystery, right? That if you're someone that likes those kinds of things, or needs those kinds of things, or wants those kind of things in order to feel fulfilled, you find here an attractive woman that seems bubbly and extroverted, and then you have this guy who is deeply philosophical and constantly thinking about these kinds of things. Yeah, if you're missing something in your life, and these two individuals can provide that for you, yeah, absolutely, it can be very tempting.
What do you think is going through the mind of Lori Vallow right now as she sits in that cell and we await closing arguments and then going to the jury?
If I had to guess, I think she's still stuck in a delusional world in which she's done everything right, and no one believes her and no one understands her motives.
Still very much who she was going into this, the same person coming out.
Yeah, I think so.
This is an examination of the hidden human condition.
This is the Hidden Killers Podcast.
The Hidden Killers Podcast.
With Tony Brueski.
Dr. John Delatorre, thank you so much for your insight on that. If you like the podcast, you want access to everything we got, advanced episodes, including live courtroom audio, all of it ad-free. Check us out on Apple Podcasts. Press subscribe over there to our premium content. Even try it for 3 days free. My name's Tony Brueski. Stay with us.